Live.
Good afternoon. Welcome to another virtual author event with the Poison Pen Bookstore. I'm John Charles, and we're delighted to have with us today two terrific authors, Heather Gudenkauf and Julia Heaberlin. Before I turn things over to our authors, I just have a brief commercial message. First, we do have a limited number of signed copies of Heather's new book and Julia's new book, and we would love to sell those to you. Feel free to go to the bookstore's website or call us. I know we would appreciate the order, and the authors would too. Now, without further ado, let me introduce our guest authors this afternoon. Heather Gudenkauf is an Edgar Award-nominated New York Times and USA Today best-selling author of a number of different suspense novels, including The Weight of Silence, and her latest is This Is How I Lied, which was chosen by the New York Times Book Review this summer as one of their top thrillers to read, and I concur with the New York Times, it is a top thriller to read. Julia is the author of the internationally best-selling Black-Eyed Susans, as well as a number of other thrillers, including her latest, We Are All the Same in the Dark. As a journalist, Julia has worked at a number of different newspapers, including the Fort Worth Star, which during her tenure as an editor of the Life and Art section was named one of the top 10 sections in the country for newspapers. Now, without further ado, let's welcome Julia and Heather. Welcome, ladies.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here with you and with Julia. It's really just a treat to be here. And Julia, I have to start off. I loved your book. I loved it. And can you give those of us who haven't read it yet, a little sneak peek into what it's about?
I will, but first I want to say that this is the first time Heather and I have met face-to-face, that she has loomed large in my life. For a long time, she was the first author who blurbed my book in the beginning, my first book. And she was the first one to blurb this one as well, and made me feel comfortable about the fact that I had a heroine with prosthetics. And I was so worried about that, and she gave me confidence that I had hit the mark on that. So thank you very much for that. She's a wonderful person. Now diving into We Are All the Same in the Dark a little. It centers around a small Texas town obsessed over a cold case. I call it The Town That Waits. And the book opens with a young girl who is found by the side of the road. She's lost, she's mute, and she only has one eye. She is one of two very ferocious heroines in this book, the other being Odette, who is a cop who's determined to solve not only the mystery of this lost girl, but also that old cold case, because it was a friend of hers who disappeared. And what about you? What about your book?
Well, interestingly, my book, This Is How I Lied, is also about a cold case. So my story takes place in Iowa, a small town in Iowa, and it starts over 20 years ago in this small town, and we get the perspective of a young girl who, for reasons unknown at the beginning, finds herself in a circuit of caves and meets her demise. Well, we get this character, Eve's point of view throughout the story, but it's the last day of her life. So we get from late in one night to the afternoon of the next day, and we learn a little bit about Eve that way. Well, flashing forward 25 years, we meet Maggie, her best friend, and Nola, her little sister, and they're the two that discovered Eve in the caves after her death. And this huge mystery erupts, and there are a few suspects, but no clues, and the case goes cold. So 25 years later, Maggie is a police officer with her local police department, and a new piece of evidence in Eve's case comes out, and she finds herself thrown back into that terrible night years ago. And she happens to be 7 months pregnant and awaiting the birth of her first child. So that adds a layer of suspense. And she learns very quickly that someone will do anything to keep the secrets of this small town buried. So our books have a lot in common.
That's true. They each star a cop whose father was a cop. There are a lot of odd similarities.
Yeah. And we didn't know that before we kind of got connected here, and so that makes it even so much more fun to be able to talk to you. Annie Dillard said, at its best, the sensation of writing is that of any unmerited grace. It is handed to you, but only if you look for it. And I always think that's such a poignant quote.
Beautiful line.
I think as writers, we're always looking for the next story, and how do you search for and find your stories, especially this one? How did it come to you?
The way all my books began are with this very tiny, tiny little vision, and sometimes it's just a character who haunts my mind. And in this case, it was this lost girl. I couldn't see her face in context, but I knew that she was missing an eye, and I knew there was an ugly town taking shape down the road. So that's all I knew when I began this book. I got very stuck in the beginning, almost right away. And so I started to do research into that, which inspired not only the characters, but the plot itself, which is usually how it works for me. So, but I am not one of those outliners. I don't know if you are, but I just let the characters drive the story. Is that the case for you?
Well, for me, I usually get my ideas for a little snippet of an idea from something I see in the news. So it can be anything or something I see or read. And I'd like to think that I'm not an outliner, no, I'm not a plotter, but I like to think I have this summary in my mind of where the story's going to go, and it never ever works out that way, ever. And
right.
So, for this book, I actually got, This Is How I Lied, I really got an idea for it in regard to cold cases. I read this great book by nonfiction book called I'll Be Gone in the Dark by
Oh, yeah, of course. Mm-hmm.
And which she investigated and kind of researched the Golden State Killer, and the idea of cold cases, that really fascinated me. The book terrified me. I don't scare easily. I mean, we both write thrillers, and I don't scare easily, but that book, I'll Be Gone in the Dark, scared me. And the idea of a cold case, and not for years and years, families not getting the answers that they deserve, and that just really kind of hooked me. And I knew I wanted to attempt to tackle that in this book.
It's kind of an American and British fascination, cold cases. And that's not only the only thing we have in common. I think we both use our states as kind of a character in our novels. Texas for me, and Iowa for you. And then we also drift into small towns a lot. Can you tell me a little bit about that? And are you trying to tell us something about Iowa? Why do you choose Iowa as the setting, besides the fact that you live there and know it so well?
Yeah, I wasn't born in Iowa, but I'm a Midwest girl. I grew up here. I've raised my family here. And when I wrote my first book, it was important for me. The story I wanted to tell needed to be set here in Iowa. And then just from there on out, all my books, it just feels right. It just feels right. Iowa is home to me. Many people think of Iowa as, only cornfields and, flat prairie, which we have, and it's beautiful. But we also have these gorgeous bluffs. We have the Mississippi River and Missouri River. We have woods and lots of hiking trails. And in my own little way, I want to share that with the world, that Iowa really is this really gorgeous, beautiful place, and great people. But, we have our dark side too, and that shows up in my books.
That's the same with Texas. I feel this sort of need to defend its diversity and its beauty, and kind of lay it out there with all its flaws as well. So I think it's often stereotyped by the rest of the world. So, and I grew up in Texas, and so I feel like I wore it as a second skin my whole life. And I think in this particular book, I say it's a poison you drink from your mother's breast, and that's how I think people feel sometimes. You can't leave this place and not carry Texas with you.
Yeah, I think that, similar for here, and, people ask me if I'll set a book in a different location, and, I never say never, but as long as there's stories and that come out of Iowa that I can think of, and I will most likely continue doing that.
I agree. Texas demands to be in there.
Yes, yes. And I said earlier, I was lucky enough to get a sneak peek into your book, and I knew as soon as I started reading it, it was a special book. But then I met the character you created of Odette, and I am not ashamed to say I started crying. Odette will forever be a character that I will adore and love, and you created this amazing character who is strong, independent, opinionated, and really good at her job as a police officer. But she also happens to have lost her leg in an accident and wears a prosthetic. And I'm the mom of a boy who lost his leg to cancer when he was 13. And so many of the experiences that you touched upon in the book, and you didn't dwell on it, but it's a part of Odette. It's a part of her, of who she is and what makes her up. You nailed it. I mean, you captured so many of the emotions and experiences that I can honestly say our family went through, my son went through. And you have a quote there from Odette. She says, my leg wakes me up. There's a knife in it. Except the knife is a phantom. There is a permanent imprint in my brain of the leg. Sometimes, like right now, the buried leg feels more real than the one I can touch. And I haven't had the experience of that phantom pain, but my son has it. I've been there with him when he has it. And not many people can describe it, but this is the closest in reading that I've come to someone describing it that my son tried to describe to me. And it's amazing. So I just have to thank you because as a reader and as a mom, who's someone who's with a son who has some differences, I love reading books about characters that don't look like everybody else. And I think it's so important. So kudos to you. So here's my question though, after all that. How did you get into the characters of Odette and Angel, who have such unique perspectives and experiences, especially with losing a limb or an eye?
It goes back to all that research. When I started and was so stuck on Odette, not Odette, on Angel, the girl with one eye, I Googled an ocularist in Dallas named Randy Tronick, who basically changed the entire book. It wouldn't be the same book without him. He makes these beautiful prosthetic eyes that are so perfect that people can keep them a secret if they want to. And he introduced me to three actually remarkable, two women and a girl who wear a prosthetic eye. And just listening to their experiences, they completely inspired the characters, all of the characters. And in addition, I talked to a young woman who had lost her hand in a terrible car accident, and a SWAT team leader, ex-cop, who had lost his leg. And, they let me ask them anything. And that's what I feel like I had to do. And I was still so worried about getting it right. But he said, yes, ask me anything, this big tough guy. And I said, I need to know how you go to the bathroom in the middle of the night. Do you have crutches? Do you hop? Do you crawl? I mean, I got into that kind of detail because I did not want someone reading this book who knew the reality to say, oh, she knows nothing about this. So kudos to all of them who made this book more real.
Yeah, and I remember in the book too, you talked about when Odette needed to get up during the night and her leg was over there, and that vulnerability that when, most of us can just hop right out of bed and do what we need to do and go where we need to go, but there's this extra step involved, and I just thought it was really quite amazing. So thank you.
One of the women I interviewed is the director of a prosthetics lab. Her name is Leslie Gray, and she told me that little story about Oscar Pistorius, who of course is accused of murdering his girlfriend. And he said it was because he was in fear because he was in bed with his legs off. And she said, I can understand that fear. So whether he killed his girlfriend or not, who knows, but she could understand that fear. And that sort of flipped things on its head for me, including just the desire to keep an eye a secret, and not to be defined by that, and how all of us don't want to be defined by what we're missing, and we're all missing something. But
Yes.
I wanted to ask you about the caves in your book, in particular one cave where adults warn the children not to go. It has too many twists and turns. They could get lost forever. It floods, and yet the kids in the novel, of course, do explore the cave in their childhood. And I love this line where you said they come to know it like they know their backyard. And you go to children a lot, and you portray them in sort of a heroic and very smart way. You really respect them. And so I wondered, where does that come from? Does that come from your own childhood? Does that come from your own children? Does it come from teaching a lot of children? Because I know you taught.
Well, the first part of that, the caves, people are really surprised that there are caves in Iowa. There are caves, and there is
in this one? I want to know that. Did you go in this one?
Yes, yeah. So there's the circuit of caves that this is somewhat based on. Grotto, the town is fictional, but it's based on a town near me. And there are these creepy caves. And, as a kid, I was a rule follower. I was one of those kids. So I didn't we ran probably like you did. We used to be able to run the neighborhoods from sun up to sundown, and we did that, of course. I didn't do anything too tricky, but we would spend our time down at the creeks, and we didn't have caves where I grew up. But, we would try and go to, some places that probably we weren't supposed to. But, when I write about kids, and I think you're right, I think it comes from a lot of places. I'm a mom. I have been in education for many years. And what I found, kids that I've worked with over the years and my own kids, you never quite know what they're going through. But you do know that kids are resilient. They take things more in stride than many adults are able to. And they just have this real hopeful outlook. And so I love bringing that into my stories, because I think we both write dark thrillers, but I think both of us, we have an element of hope with them too, as well. And that's really important to me, because I like to think I'm a hopeful person. So, so I think that when I do try to include young people in my books, that's important to me to include that.
Well, you do an amazing job of it.
Thank you. And you have your roots in journalism, actually, right? You started out as a journalist, and how did you pivot to writing fiction? And what do you like about each?
I was about 45 when I wrote my first book and was rejected for 3 years. I quit journalism after a fairly successful 20-something year, career. So it was a big leap, and it certainly killed any ego that I had. They're two very different things, writing fiction and writing off of facts alone. And I tried to mix the two in my thrillers as subtly as I can, so there's another layer under there. And I think journalism helps me do that. And also, just feel free to call up any expert at any moment, whether they know me or not. That has served me well, and a lot of those people have become my friends. But I like both of them equally. I still do some journalism, but just very, very different things.
Well, that's great. I love that you're able to incorporate both into your.
How do you do your research? Are you very structured in that, or?
No, I usually start writing first, and then as questions come up, I jot them down and then reach out. I tend to have to reach out for, of course, the police procedural part in my books, because there always tends to be an element of that. And I'm so fortunate to, my kids went to school with our police chief's kids. And so very early on in my writing career, I think from my second book on, I reached out to him and would ask for advice and input, or he'd invite me over to the police station to take a tour and, go through the process of booking and all that. And so now I'll email him and I'll say, Mark, I'm starting another book. Is there to ask you a few questions? And it's always a lot more than a few questions. So I think, that part for me, the research part in the beginning, I'm much better at it now, but I was always, I come from an education point of view and quite reserved or shy, I would say, even in social situations, that it was hard for me to call people up and ask. I wish I had that skill that you have to, just get somebody on the phone, but I'm getting much better at it and realize that people like to help. They like to share their expertise in their different fields. So.
And they want it to be portrayed correctly. I mean, that's, so no one has ever said no to me. I don't know about if that's the case.
No, I've been very lucky too.
Well, you talked about how we write dark stories. Well, you have a very dark and twisted character in your book, Nola. And I don't want to say too much about her, but she's fascinating. And you just learn a little bit more about her as you move along. You do a fantastic job in this book. I'm not giving anything away, of us wondering with every single character and every narration whether this is a person we should believe. But Nola specifically stood out to me as a very interesting character, because I know how hard it is to write characters like that who are complex, and we want all our characters to be complex, but she was particularly complex. So how did that happen? Was she evil not evil, because she's really not, well, I don't even want to say, can't say. Was she that twisty from the very beginning, or did she develop?
She developed, absolutely. And we had talked earlier this week, we chatted, and I told you this was a really hard book for me to write. It was just one of those projects where, I tend to write ugly, I call it. When I start writing, I just throw everything on the page, and the good, the bad, the ugly, and it's messy, really messy. And so the first draft of this book, Nola was really much more subdued. I mean, she was a little bit complicated, but she's nothing like the character we see in the final manuscript, the final book. But so that really had to be layered throughout my revisions, and to push myself. And I'm fortunate to have a great editor who knows how to push me and keep pushing the limits, and make her darker was the advice. And that wasn't always easy for me, but with that editor I was able to bring this more complicated, disturbed character who had a little bit of nuances. You wonder, how is she really that bad? What are her redeeming qualities? That kind of thing. So it was definitely a journey.
Well, so you just hinted a little at how hard it was to write this particular book. For me, this book was the hardest that I've ever written. So can you tell me why it was so hard and what you did to break through?
Yeah, as you know, every project is so different. This one, the first, like I said, I write ugly, just get everything down. I tend to be one of those writers. I love to read books that have beautiful language in it and really build people's backstories and, describe the scenery. And I love reading books like that. And I like to write that way, but in a thriller, you can only have so much of that, because the goal of a thriller is you want to keep people turning the pages, not looking at the azaleas, And so there was a lot of cutting in my books. I had to cut a lot of it. I had to go back and make it darker, really push that character. And I won't say what it is, but there's a big twist in the middle that was going to come closer to the end, but we moved back to the middle of the book. And then, so that kind of, blows up your timeline a little bit. So it was just it was a challenge. There were moments when I thought, should I set this project aside and try something else? But no, I was determined to do it, and I'm so glad I did. I'm so glad I stuck with it because.
But you would never know reading it. That a little.
No, there were some sleepless nights with it for sure. Yes, and you had mentioned too that you had a similar, that similar experience. So, what is your favorite part of the writing process? You said it, it was kind of tough, this book. What made it tough? But what is your favorite part of the writing process? Is it the initial idea? Is it the editing piece? What do you think?
It's the part where you turn it in and it's done and you don't know what your editor thinks yet. That's my favorite part right there. This particular book was hard because I lost a friend rather traumatically. And so I was writing another book, but it reminded me, part of that book, so much of her that I quit that book and started over. So already I felt somewhat behind. So, and I've learned that it's easier to write dark books when you're in a happy place yourself than when you're in a dark place yourself, which is interesting because people say, you seem like such a happy person and you write such scary books. I'm glad you didn't kill me in high school, But, so that made it particularly tough. And so I was staring, I guess the main thing was that I just couldn't get my word count every day. That's how I write. I say I'm going to get X number of words a day, and I couldn't reach that. I was reaching half of that, and it being actually of some quality. So it was just, pushing forward. A lot of the book is the same as it was, of course, with editing. It's revised and revised and revised, which is something all writers should know out there. Revision is writing. The beginning draft is just the beginning. So.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think that has been a learning curve for me. I just am working on my 9th book now, and that revision process, it is so humbling, but it is such an important part of that process, and it's where, for me, the book gets much better, of course, and I'm learning to embrace that, like to trying to make this the fun part, where it's really where we dig in and discover what the book is really supposed to be.
Is that the fun part of writing for you?
No. I'm trying to make it be the revising process. I'm trying to psych myself out and say I love it. And I do. But no, my favorite part is when you get that spark of an idea, and that the beginning part where you just you get what you can down right away, and that's exciting to me.
One of the other things I like is just when you come up with a great phrase, after, and sometimes that might take 3 hours to get this perfect phrase, but it's a big high when you do, right?
Exactly. It's like, oh, this is so beautiful, and you just want to.
And your editor suggests cutting it, but you don't.
Yes, you find a way to slide it in there for sure. Yes. Well, you're talking about great lines. I mean, I love this line. I'm going to share it. And this one just really struck me at such a visceral, deep level. You say in the book, the character Angel says, "We are all the same in the dark. My mother said that to me when she kissed me goodnight. She meant that in the dark, all that's left is our souls." And I just thought, oh, that is so true. It's so beautiful. And I know that you had written about this line and how it became the title of your book. Part of it became the title of your book. How did you decide that?
So this book had a different title all the way along. It started out as The Lion's Eye, then it went to The Wishing Field, then I suggested The Dandelion Grave, and 100 other ideas. And in the end, it was a young woman I've never met in the UK who picked this theme out of the book and came up with a title. I actually sell more books in the UK, so they're very involved in the process and the marketing, and the US liked the headline too. I mean, the headline seat, the journalism part, and the title of the book as well. And to me, it is the soul of the book, which is that we're all the same in the dark. In the dark, all that's left is our souls. And the only thing other people can't see the distracting things about us, the physical things, whether we're missing an arm or a leg, or we're fat or we're skinny, ugly or pretty. All those things disappear. So that is what the title means to me. How do you come up with titles? Do you come up with your own titles every time? Because I have in the past, but not this book.
I am terrible at titles. I am terrible, and almost always my initial title for a book does not stick. And so thankfully I have people around me who can help pull out the good ones. And so, but for This Is How I Lied, I was really close, because throughout the writing process, it was titled This Is How I Died. And as from the character of Eve, who we know doesn't survive. But, yeah, yes. But so it was changed to This Is How I Lied. I find titles very hard, because it's you want to encompass what your whole story is about in this really short sentence or phrase, and few short words, and it's tough. It's tough to do that. So I am notoriously bad at choosing titles.
Well, I like that title. You came up with it.
Thank you. So I just a little bit to go back to, about the physical differences. I read where you had written that what you wanted most from readers about getting from the book is you hope that it's two ferocious heroines, which would be Angel and Odette, one missing an eye, one missing a leg, will prompt a discussion about how our culture still perpetuates stereotypes about ideal physical beauty. And I love that, because I think we are, as a society, are terrible about that. We put such impossible expectations on our kids, on ourselves, on those around us. Can you talk to us more about why that's important to you?
Because talking to all of these people changed it changed my own perception of what ideal physical beauty is. And one of the women I talked with, and I read her book before I wrote, and I talked to her after I wrote my book. But her name is Lauren Scruggs, and she became famous after she stepped off a airplane one night after viewing Christmas lights and into a propeller blade, and lost her arm and her leg. Not her arm and her leg, her arm and her eye. And she talked to me on the phone and talked about how she didn't understand what, disabled or differently able really meant. That for her, she could do anything she could do before except, nail a picture to the wall, because she has depth perception with the eye loss. And so that was fascinating to me, that no one wanted to be defined by this, and yet it shouldn't have been a surprise to me at all. Of course, none of us want to be defined by anything, so that's what I learned in the process of this book. And then I will probably not use those words again to describe people who can do more than I can do, basically.
I think we get into trouble when we kind of pigeonhole people into certain categories and underestimate people,
What is your son's perspective on this?
He does everything that everybody else does. In high school, he was on the wrestling team. He was on the track team, doing shot put. He actually won the state championship for the chair shot put. So from a chair shooting. He takes part in Taekwondo now, and so it really doesn't limit him in any way. That he does what he wants to do. He's skied, he plays golf. So yeah, he's just Alex, and I think that's the best way to define anybody is just who they are. Yeah. So Pandemic.
Oh yeah, in the pandemic, I was actually going to ask you a question about the pandemic, which is, I have really wrestled with how much to promote a book when there's so many national conversation about race and of course the pandemic itself. And so how have you felt about that in promoting, and has the pandemic in general changed? I know it has, how you promote and how hard it is to promote and just, all of that.
Yeah, it has been a little tricky because, in a time when so many people are suffering for so many different reasons, whether, it be COVID and, the loss that comes with that, either health or life or jobs and livelihoods, or, what's been going on with race and, how, that should be the conversation we're having. So it's really hard to go out and step out into the public and say, look at my book, buy my book. And that can be really uncomfortable. But it's a necessary part of what we do. So how I've tried to look at it is, when it doesn't feel right, don't do it. I've had a few events where we've talked about rescheduling just because at that certain time, it wasn't the right time. So we rescheduled it for another time. But for me, growing up and now, reading has been such a respite and an escape. And so we need books more than ever. And, if I can spend a few minutes talking about my book or books I love, and that can provide a little bit of escapism for people, I think that's a good thing. But it's tricky. It's a fine line of what's too much and what's not enough. How about you?
I've done the same thing, particularly with social media, where you say you're introverted. I'm an introverted person as well. So it's been, a whole learning experience to, promote like this in the pandemic. So, I've pulled back on social media at various times. We had things planned, and I just said I don't feel comfortable putting it out there. I just can't do it. Let's do something else. So you kind of ride the waves of when it feels right. And, in the beginning, my galleys were locked in a warehouse in New York. And so they couldn't mail them out. All my publicists were in tiny New York apartments trying to stay safe, warehouse workers trying to stay safe. So I asked them to send them to me. So I mailed them from my kitchen table to a number of bookstagrammers and entered a very fascinating and rewarding world and made, a lot of human connections. So there've been, positives about it as well. But it's definitely a very tough thing. And so it's wonderful to see authors supporting authors, but you are always like that.
Gosh, thank you. Yeah, same to you. So thank you.
Ladies, speaking of social media, it looks like we do have some questions for you. And I'm going to start off with my own question, which is, you mentioned how much you love to read. Can you tell us, each of you, a little bit about something or several titles you've read recently you want to share with other readers?
Yes. Oh my gosh. I have been reading a ton during this pandemic. One that I've read recently was Codename Helene by Ariel Lehon, which is historical fiction, World War II. And it's about a socialite who becomes a spy during World War II. And I love reading historical fiction. And there's another one coming out by Erica Roebuck called The Invisible Woman, which interestingly, Julia, also features a woman who had an amputation with her leg, and she was a spy in World War II based on a true story. So that was really good, and that should be coming out, I think, later this year. So yeah, so I love reading everything, but historical fiction is really a treat for me.
I hate to say this as an author, but it has been a huge struggle for me to read during the pandemic. Yours was one of the books that broke through. One of the things I did do was reread The Silence of the Lambs. And I did that because I thought it would be instructive to inspiring me to write my next book, to read, this classic thriller that scared me to death when I was much younger, and see if it held up and what I could learn from it, which I learned a lot from it, not just how the pacing, how much I might try to speed up my pacing a little. People call me a slow burn writer, which I'm not exactly sure what that means because I feel tense all the time while I'm writing. But it was fascinating to look at his use of dialogue, which took up maybe half of the book. I had no idea there was that much dialogue. And also that it was kind of a treatise on feminism. That not only is Clarice a hero, but so is Catherine, the young woman trapped by the serial killer. So those are the two books that stand out to me. I have lots of them piled on the side of my nightstand, and I feel now more like I can get back to really reading a lot. I have read other books, but those are the two that stand out.
And I think a lot of people can echo that feeling of not being able to get settled into a book because their minds are racing. And rereading is a great idea. That reminded me that I did reread a series, which is so much fun. It's by Lisa Lutz called the Spellman Files.
Okay. Yeah.
So much fun. I reread the whole thing during the pandemic just because it was something fun, familiar.
Familiar, I think.
Yeah, that was good.
So a question we have from Alex for Julia is, would you like to write a series? And she says that she feels like she felt reading Playing Dead that it would be ideal for a series, I suppose.
So I could not hear it quite, but I think it was that Playing Dead, Playing Dead would, the character in that would have made a good series?
Yeah, have you ever?
Awesome?
Yeah.
Okay. I wanted that character to be part of a series, and it was my publisher who decided no to that. So way to go saying that. But that was an idea. I started out with her as a series character, but I mean, the benefit of that is that I've been able to take a deep dive into a lot of other kinds of personalities. And, there are limitations with writing a series character. You often have to take them in a darker and more layered place than you want to after your, say, 15th book on that character. So I'm happy the way it turned out. But yes, I did love Tommy McLeod.
We have another question from Lynn, which is, what did you learn about yourself and writing by making a midlife change to a published author? Did you hear that at all? No?
What?
No, good luck with that. And Heather, you take that.
I'll repeat the question. They wanted to know what you learned about yourself when you made the decision to become an author kind of midway through your life rather than early on. So
Yeah, I was on the track to be a teacher since I was a kindergartner, first grader. I wanted to be a teacher, and so that was my path. And I've always loved to read, and so, but I like to write too. But it wasn't until my kids were school age, and I had this idea for a story that I just really felt I needed to write. And The Way to Silence was my first book, and it was a big leap because I had been doing something that I felt very comfortable for so long, and delving into something I had absolutely zero confidence in, didn't know anybody in publishing, didn't know what I was doing, but I was really compelled to write this story. So it was a big leap. It was scary, but I'm so glad I did it. We always tell our kids, students, as teachers, dream big, you got to dream big. And so sometimes it counts for us as well. And so that was kind of my mantra as I pursued putting the book forward. How about you?
I'd say my ego went to ground zero and I rebuilt myself. It was hard to be successful at something else and then have a lot of people tell you you weren't successful at this, whether it was the months that it took to get an agent or being rejected by every major publishing house. And I tell writers now that I wish I'd known that publishing houses are the same as every place else. It's filled with geniuses and fools, and you might have been rejected by a fool. So So it has given me a lot of grit, I would say, and determination that if I think something is right, I'm going to push for it now. That wasn't the way in the beginning. So anyway, it definitely changed who I am. I lost a little bit of confidence, but I think because I feel like an insecure writer still a lot of the time, but I'm still successful, and you just have to remind myself of that sometimes. So I know that writers out there who aren't published feel this way. Just know that we feel that way sometimes too. So.
And then final question, we had quite a few from Jennifer, but here's one of her really good ones. What advice would you give someone who wants to become a writer?
I would say read, and write. And you just have to jump in and do it. I just think, if you have a story to tell, get it out there, get it on paper. You can always go back and make it better, and just really jump into it, full forward.
And I would echo that, in that, I'm not part of a writer's group. I don't let anyone read my book until I'm completely finished with it, because I want it to be my voice. And so I tell writers to do that. I don't know about you, Heather, but I don't take a lot of advice in the very beginning. And I would say that the only way to get better as a writer is to sit down and do it and do it and do it and do it. No one's going to help you. You have to inspire yourself. It's like being a carpenter and building more muscle all the time. It is not just what you were born with and your perception of the world, but it is the hard work that goes into just getting better.
Well, I'd like to thank both Julia and Heather for joining us this afternoon, and for you tuning in to another Poison Pen virtual author event. We look forward to seeing you again.